The Metropolitan Police has said that the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth will be the biggest security operation it has ever undertaken as Prime Ministers, Presidents and Royals come together tomorrow to pay their respects to Britain's longest reigning monarch. GBNews Home and Security Editor Mark White joins us now live from Westminster. So, Mark, what is the situation there now? Is there an update? Is anything happening at the moment?
Well, we're seeing certainly a visible ramping up of the security really around central London just in the last day or so, as many of these world leaders are now in the area, having landed in London over the last couple of days. So we're told that there are some 500 world leaders and other dignitaries that have been invited to the funeral on Monday, and many of them, of course, normally would command their own security details with motorcades and alike, but the way in which the Metropolitan Police, who are in charge of the operation, are running it purely for practical reasons, is the exercise of podding, effectively where they will put world leaders, senior politicians and other VIPs in specially secured buses. These buses will have armed police on board. They'll be escorted to Westminster Abbey for the service. And I mean, it may be a little bit sort of undignified for some of these world leaders who are used to zipping in motorcades, but that's practically the way that it's going to have to work. It won't work for everyone that way. We're told that the US President will actually arrive. He will arrive in the motorcade, in the Beast, of course, as it's been dubbed, with that motorcade of usually about 20-odd vehicles. And that's simply because you would never get a situation where the Secret Service would ever cede control of the protection of the President to a third country. So the UK or not, they will look after him in that sterile bubble, as they always do. But the greater bubble that they will be in will be provided, of course, by the Metropolitan Police, the security service, the armed forces as well. This is a big operation involving the armed forces. Thousands of military personnel will help line the route tomorrow, and thousands more, about 6,000 we're told, will be in the procession itself as it leaves Westminster Abbey, heads up Whitehall, crosses through Horse Guards Arch, into Horse Guards proper, down the Mall, and then up to Wellington Arch. And at that point, of course, from the gun carriage, which is being pulled by some 98 sailors, it will be transferred onto the state hearse. And there will still be an opportunity then for members of the public to get a glimpse of the late monarch, because the hearse will then make its way, that procession will make its way on A roads all the way up to Windsor Castle for the committal service at St George's Chapel. So a big security operation at the moment, but it gets even more complicated as we move into the state funeral tomorrow. And this evening, I think, is probably the first real big test of the way that security and the way that the podding operation will work, as we have hundreds of world leaders and other VIPs heading to Buckingham Palace. They'll be heading there for a reception at 6 o'clock. It's been billed as a formal state reception with King Charles and these world leaders. And because, of course, there are hundreds of them going to Buckingham Palace, this will be the first opportunity that we get to see this podding operation in practice, and it will be a good rehearsal is probably the wrong word, because they're doing it in earnest, but it will certainly be a tester for them as to how this actual security operation with all these armed deployed units works.
It's interesting how they've managed to sort of do this. They must have been practising this particular moment for quite some time. I know, Grant, you wanted to ask Mark something.
Well, one of the things I was wondering, Mark, is one of the questions I've been asked about is to do with actually the Queen laying in state, is that The cut-off point, because obviously I think it's tomorrow morning, is 6 a.m. or 6:30, and people have been saying to me, but what happens if there's people queuing? How does it stop? And I didn't actually know the answer. I didn't know if there's a point where they actually, during the night, they close the queue, or do they continue, and it's a because there'll be people in the queue.
I think they will warn people.
Is there a plan, Mark, for that? How are they going to sort of close off the queue and stop everything?
Yeah, no, it's a good point, Grant. What they will do, they're actually now sending out the message via the Department of Culture, Media and Sport to people not to come and join that queue now, because they've calculated clearly that the back end of the queue will get through in time for 6:30 in the morning, when that queue or that viewing is brought to an end, and then preparations are made to take the coffin across to Westminster Abbey. But if people start queuing after that, well, they won't be allowed to, because the calculation is, given the time that it will take to walk through from where the end of the queue is at the moment, that you just wouldn't make it on time. So they will err on the side of caution. They will stop people joining the end of that queue now, in the knowledge that those who are at the end of the queue just now will make it through in plenty time for the final viewing at 6:30. So although it says 6:30, probably will have seen the last of them go through a bit before then.
It will be very interesting to see how many people have actually filed past the catafalque and the coffin. An accurate count is being made, and I'll be interested to see the figure. When the last major state funeral of this kind was Winston Churchill in January 1965, and he lay in state, I think, also for 4 days, and 1/3 people, 330,000 people, passed by his coffin, which happened to be precisely the number of soldiers who were rescued from the beaches of Dunkirk at the beginning of his administration during the war in 1940 in Operation Dynamo. There's some sort of symbolism in that. There's a lot of symbolism in all this, you know, because when from your native Scotland Her Majesty's coffin was brought by air, landed at RAF Northolt, west of London, in precisely the same spot as where the aircraft bringing her from East Africa, when she succeeded to the throne in February 1952, it came back and it parked there, a BOAC aircraft, and she came down the steps, 25 years old, as the new Queen.
Wow.
And Winston Churchill, with the entire cabinet, was there to bow and welcome the new Queen back.
So Mark, do we have a number on roughly how many people have queued so far? Do we have a counter or something? Is there somewhere they're counting? Do we have an update of that figure?
We'll get that count at the end of this process, but we don't have a count as yet. We know, of course, that when the Queen Mother was lying in state in Westminster Hall, some 200,000 people were able to view the coffin on that occasion. Now, the way they've set up the security in big marquees just off to my right-hand side, they have a lot more in the way of security personnel on there than they did for the Queen Mother when she was lying in state, which means they're able to process them through in bigger numbers. So we would expect that it's certainly going to be well north of 200,000 and should, I'm sure, beat the 330-odd thousand who also saw Sir Winston Churchill's body when it was lying in state. And we know, with a couple of exceptions, a few hours where the queues were halted just because of the sheer numbers that were stacking up at this end, it's been pretty much a continual flow throughout, and it's been moving pretty fast. The queues, I can see behind me, they're still moving and moving pretty quickly. So as I say, that number will come out once this whole operation is over and the viewing has ended.